behalf of the USIBC board and our members and other guests here today, I'd like to welcome you to the USIBC's 20th India Ideas Summit, which reflects our 45th year of supporting the development of the India-US relationship. We are honored that you've taken the time to join us today. We're looking forward to our conversation. India and the US have come a long way since USIBC started its work in 1975. Our relationships can be summed up with something Henry Ford once said: coming together is a beginning, staying together is progress, but working together is success. By that definition, our two countries are really successful. Prime Minister Modi, along with his cabinet, have created an unparalleled growth story for the Indian economy. All sectors, digital, defense, manufacturing, energy, and of course, financial services, have benefited from policies intended to attract foreign direct investment, improve the ease of doing business, and create an environment for growth and expansion. These reforms have transformed the lives of millions of Indian citizens and brought Indian capabilities and skills to the forefront of the global economy. And it is this very robustness of Indian markets and the strength of the financial infrastructure that will be fundamental to giving India the economic resiliency it needs to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. The tools, the skills, and the commitment are already in place. COVID-19 has forced policymakers around the world to balance the physical health of their citizens against the soundness of the markets and the economy on which these citizens depend for their livelihoods. These are not easy choices for any government. Your recent economic and fiscal measures have helped stabilize the markets, fortify the companies that operate within them, and set the Indian economy and its stakeholders, both domestic and foreign, on a path forward during these difficult times. But I don't believe that we are out of the woods yet. And whether it is India or the US, we still have a long ways to go and hard choices ahead of us. The pandemic has made clear the importance of the partnership between industry and policymakers in saving lives and livelihoods, as well as for developing structural reforms to promote a dynamic and sustainable recovery. To make real the themes of this year's Idea Summit, Build a Better India, it is imperative that all stakeholders, both government and industry, must align in their vision and priorities and have a shared understanding of the challenges and the goals ahead. I'd like to use our time together today to start this process. We look forward to hearing your vision of economic recovery, how you see where we are and how can we move forward to protect jobs and savings of average investors, continue attracting foreign direct investment, and power the growth trajectory through new reforms. USIBC and its members believe this to be a unique opportunity, one in which industry can align itself with your vision and help resolve the challenges to your collective goals. We will hear from industry after this session as we have a discussion with Secretary Bajaj. USIBC members and guests, I'd now like to take a moment to introduce to you the Honorable Minister of Finance, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, who has had an illustrious career as a policymaker by any measure and any jurisdiction. She's currently the Union Minister of Finance and Corporate Affairs, a position she assumed in May 2019. Prior to that, she was a Union Minister of Defense, and prior to that, Union Minister of Commerce. Minister Sitharaman has been a member of the BJP party since 2006 and served as party spokesperson in 2010. She was inducted in Prime Minister Modi's cabinet as a junior minister in 2014 and was elected to the Rajya Sabha, India's upper house, from Andhra Pradesh. I'm proud to announce, and especially as a father of 3 girls myself, that she was the first woman to serve as a full-time defense minister and has been the first woman to serve as finance minister. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me present to you Minister Sitharaman. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you. Namaste. Gives me immense pleasure to be with you all, especially when you're marking your 45th annual gathering. And also, I think at this time when the entire world is looking at what is happening because of the pandemic, the standstill that economies have come to, the recovery process, the planning for the recovery and so on. And at a time like this, to also be able to talk with a focus on innovation and inclusion, I think you just did the right thing for businesses of both India and the US to think in terms of what industry can do towards recovery of both our economies. And in that process, I think we are sharing our thoughts about what each of our governments have done and to set the, let's say, the landscape of what I'm going to probably present before you in somewhat concise fashion, is to understand that even today, the large economies are not the one where the highest per capita income is. Per capita income today is high in economies which are not necessarily large. It is spread all over the world. And if democracies are the ones which have worked towards elimination of poverty, democracies are the ones which have given opportunity for innovation, and democracies are the ones which have given immense play for industry to innovate and come up with better products, more efficient processes. I think we are talking to the right two democracies which have the necessary wherewithal to look at the future as we get out of the pandemic. So I think there cannot be a better forum in which this discussion on innovation and inclusion can happen. And therefore, for me to get this opportunity to interact with you on this topic, I feel very privileged. Simply, I would start by saying there is a need globally to spend more time and money in understanding technology, in investing in R&D, and making sure more funds are made available for those who actually bring in that innovation, like the startups and industry also together with governments will have to now spare a thought and also extend a helping hand for all the incubators and the companies which come in, the startups which want to benefit from incubation. So this industry and academia relationship also has to be strengthened, made more real time. So with this background, what I would like to say here is what India has done between 2014 and today has actually done a great deal of service for this time, this unfortunate time when all of us are caught up in the pandemic. I take the example of how for India, especially because there was a great drive between 2014 and 19, the first term of Prime Minister Modi, a great emphasis was placed on financial inclusion. Nearly 40% of the Indian population, which is at the bottommost rung, who did not have even a bank account, were provided bank accounts, and those accounts were reconciled with their identity, which was given through what is called the Aadhaar identity, which was a digital identity. We were able to actually, first of all, weed out a lot of those bogus accounts, bogus cards, through which a lot of money was getting pilfered. Even the food rations which were being distributed were going to not so deserving poor. So that weeding out was done, that reconciliation with the digital identity was established, And as a result of which, when the pandemic struck us, unfortunately, the inclusion actually was not a challenge. Free food grains were distributed and 81 million people were given free food, are being given free food even today till November, so that the poorest of poor will be covered under every safety net that we have to include them in. And how was this possible? This was possible because all of them were given digitized, identity-based bank accounts and also digitized way of recognizing their level of poverty, and identity-based, therefore, public distribution system could reach them. So in doing this, we were also able to do one more thing. Many of those villages in which people live are already connected by optical fiber. And because of optical fiber connectivity, today at the time of pandemic striking us, with hospitals probably just bare minimum facilities existing, telemedicine has come to play a very big role. And as a result, controlling and treating and tracing people for treatment for the pandemic has encouraged telemedicine in a big way. And that itself tells me that technology has played a big role even during this pandemic, where I know some economies globally were even not able to reach directly to the bank accounts of the poorest who needed help, had to take checks physically, bank checks physically to the account, to the households where they were living, rather than digitally transfer money. So telemedicine was possible because of the way in which optical fiber has reached far-flung areas of India. Bank accounts were given, and as a result, cash was transferred. And because they were Aadhaar-linked public distribution identity cards, free food could reach them. Now, all this is not just going to be simply possible with governmental initiatives alone. We know during the pandemic, several industries have very quickly ramped up their production systems, that the mask and the protective equipments that people needed, personal protective equipments, have all been ramped up, where we had no production of such things in this country. When in March we came up with a huge lockdown announcement, entire April the country was in lockdown. Later in May, little by little, end of May we opened up. And by June the country really was getting partly opened up. But in the course of this lockdown, many industries which had other core activities divested from there, at least temporarily, and moved over to producing things. There was a shift in the production priorities, and we produced enough number of PPEs, the protection equipments, and we were able to benefit from not only using it for our own purposes, but we were able to send many to many of the countries which needed them. I'm just elaborating on that only because today the industry in India has clearly recognized the challenges which have come because of the pandemic. And many of them have started resetting their priorities, making sure their production, which depended on many other factors, are also being relooked at. And technology has now come in a very big way. I remember 1 year ago, or even a bit before that, when I was in defense, talking with many in the US IBC about Industrial Revolution 4.0. In Davos, that was the focus. But today, Industrial Revolution 4.0 means a totally different kind of pandemic-driven necessity that many of the industries are recognizing. So the sum and substance of what I'm trying to give you as a picture emanating from India is all of us will have to now spend a lot more on artificial intelligence, big data, because these are the things which are making a lot of difference, especially when the social distancing and other things are causing necessities which we wouldn't have otherwise imagined. India, of course, has shown under Prime Minister Modi the inclination to improve our performances, and that is why we were able to move upwards in the Global Innovation Index. We were able to move better on the ease of doing business, and therefore continuous exchange of thought, continuous tendency to reform, undertake such structural reforms which will make a big difference is something which Prime Minister Modi has never forgotten. And I would just put across to you that even during this pandemic, when we were trying to ensure that nobody goes hungry, everybody gets their due, deliveries are made at their doorstep, and money is given to people in their bank accounts and so on, even as the priority was on that. Enough and more work was done in consultation with stakeholders, all through video conferences and so on, even during the lockdown, and very many big time announcements on reform, structural reform have all been made during this period. That is, even when the challenge of the pandemic was before us, we ensured that we used this opportunity to come up with some of the major structural reforms which have waited for decades, opening up agriculture, allowing farmers to choose who they sell their product to at what price. May sound simple, but it was a reform which was dependent on so many provinces. Every state had to agree. But the central government saw that it was possible to bring that change because we clearly understood interstate activities were with the union government's powers, and in the list of responsibilities between union and the states, because it was entirely with the central government, we were able to open up agriculture. Labor codes are also being completely changed. New freshness is being brought in. Those codes will get cleared in the parliament. And above all, during the lockdown, the several things which have been done have now borne fruits that I can confidently tell you that we are able to see green shoots. And you might say it's a bit too early to say that, but the indicators that are before us are very, very clear that the power consumption has increased, toll collection and the roads have increased. Very clearly, the bank operations and their transaction of businesses, particularly the digital mode and not the ATMs, have increased in their traction. Very clearly, these are signs the PMI managers index is also improved. So I can see that the stimulus that we gave, which has touched about 10% of the GDP, has actually made a big difference for companies which want to come out of the lockdown and the effects of the lockdown. Now, not only that, Prime Minister gave a call for Atmanirbhar Bharat. I would take this opportunity to say Atmanirbhar Bharat is not an inward-looking idea. It doesn't shut the doors for exports or imports, particularly the imports. We want India to be strong. We want India to be speaking from position of strength, particularly from the economic point of view. Our MSMEs contribute to over 40% of our exports. We want them to be strong. We want them to be supported by a banking system which is strong. And that is why, from among the other reforms that we've undertaken, I would want to draw your attention to one particular announcement which I made in the month of June, end of June. Now, in India, every sector, the private is a private sector. I don't know how simply I can say it, but there is no sector which is reserved for public sector alone to be present. Meaning, every sphere of activity is now opened up for private sector to come in. And we have announced that we will have a list of strategic sectors, which will be only a select few. And in only them will there be private sectors, public sector remaining. In other words, in every sector, private sector will be, every sector of economic activity, private sector will be invited. The public sector or the public sector undertakings will be present only in certain predetermined, certain announced areas of activities. And even there, because the private sector will be allowed, there will be better competition. And in those sectors which we declare as strategically important, even there will be only up to a maximum of 4 public sector organizations and not more. The private sector is going to be anywhere welcome. So, simply put, there will not be any activity in India which will be the exclusive domain of the public sector undertakings. Private sector is welcome to come and operate in every one of them. And the public sector's presence will be reduced in only those few strategic sectors. This was also an announcement made during the lockdown when we were equally giving emphasis on livelihood, taking care of people and their lives, giving them relief for food and money. The other side, we were clearing up agriculture, we were opening it up, we were also saying private sector will now enter every sphere of activity in India. The green shoots are, as I said, placed more because of the high frequency indicators that we see. They are high frequency indicators. We will go along as we watch them. It's not as if we've concluded that the economy has seen green shoots and therefore we won't take any more steps. We've kept all the options necessary absolutely open. The government is willing to participate, talk with everybody, and see what best has to be done. Interventions can happen even in the future, depending on how industry responds to us. And lastly, to conclude, I would only want to say there have been different speculations about to what extent the economies are going to contract. Globally, it is speculated 4.7, 4.5 levels percentage will come down. We don't know. Negative 4.9, India would be negative 4.7, 4.1. Different figures are floating around. But I can see the revival of the economy, particularly if you look at India's rural areas. Agriculture, the Rabi or the summer crop has had a very good crop. All of them, where necessary, have been procured at reasonable prices so that the farmers are not left high and dry looking for purchasers. Now the assessment or the estimate for the Kharif crop, which is the short crop because of the monsoon, has also come. We can clearly see agriculture sector is driving this revival. Activities related to the rural economy, whether it's the tractor sales, whether it's the rural agricultural tool sales, whether it is the logistics which deals with these food sector and everything else, are all up and above. So I think now we are at a stage where very clearly, if we can synchronize between the movement of those monitoring the economy and the regulators, the financial sector, and also the regulators, if they all work together, a very good, strong recovery is only there before us. So I must put in one last word about the way in which the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, and the Ministry of Finance have worked together in sync with one another, that concurrently both of us have been taking such efforts so that the industry understands the 3-month moratorium which was given to them, after which it was extended for another 3 months. Liquidity was ensured so that 3.9%, if I'm right, of the GDP has been infused into the economy. Liquidity through the RBI introduced into the economy is about 3.9% of the GDP. So the RBI has also been working together. Institutional regulators such as the SEBI and others have also been cooperating. So I can see that there is a clear understanding of what this pandemic has meant to us, how the private sector has also understood and is working together with the government. The stimulus package which was given has had some kind of a resonance in the ground. Particularly the MSMEs have been attended to with specific programs, whether it's a partial guarantee or 100% guarantee. Types and differing types of packages have been given to them. With all this, I hope that the Indian industry, together with the government, will ensure a good, speedy, and sustainable recovery post the pandemic. So, with these words, sorry for a long monologue, but I'm sure you would be able to bring your life into this conversation.
So thank you. Thank you so much for your opening comments, Minister. So I know I polled our audience. We have 4 themes, and we have only 10 minutes left. So I'm going to make sure that we try and go through these four questions for you. The first is on foreign direct investment and foreign investment. India has had an unprecedented growth, 7% GDP growth for the last several years. FDI has increased dramatically, 18% to $73 billion. So as we look to promote India's economic recovery, foreign capital has the potential to play a critical role. And what foreign capital really needs is consistency, transparency, and predictability of rules. And so the question is, under these, I know you've announced certain reforms in May. Can the audience expect any other reforms to really attract FDI? And a follow-up to that is, I know that the government in May also announced that companies can list their securities on foreign stock exchange without having simultaneous listing in India. Could you share where we are on those guidelines? So that's the first theme on foreign investment.
You're right. The effort of this government is to ensure that there is a greater level of consistency in policy and there are no flip-flops. And we are ensuring transparency has always been the first thing about this government. So consistency of policy and leading to predictability is certainly something which is the top of our mind, and we've been insisting even in the announcement that I've made through the pandemic, have kept that as an underlying assumption. That is why if you just go back to September of last year, 2019, when I announced the corporate tax reduction, the first thing we said was, those of you who have been in the old system enjoying some kinds of exemptions are welcome to continue there. We are not bringing in any kind of disruption to that. But those who want far lesser rate are welcome to continue in the new one, which I'm introducing as of 1st October 2019. So in order to bring in predictability and consistency, we've kept the old system going till such a time everybody exhausts their exemptions. So that has been a driving principle in what we have been doing. And that shall continue, and we shall ensure that the policy predictability is something which will be kept up. And you're right, we have announced the direct listing abroad, and that has been a welcome step. I'm told at least Indian industry has been responding very positively on that.
Thank you. So let's move on to credit availability. In light of the lockdown measures, has contributed to the deterioration of market conditions, as we all know, not only in India, but across the world. We know there's going to be billions of dollars coming due end of August, especially by the NBFCs. And credit growth often goes hand in hand with economic growth. So both the supply of credit and the taking up of credit. Now, there's also been a reluctance to take on financial obligations. So the question I have is, what more can and should the government do to help borrowers feel more comfortable taking on risk? And on the supply side, what steps is the government doing beyond the measures that you announced in May to help credit get to the private sector?
You're aware that we had announced a stimulus package, various different sectors were to be covered by it, agriculture, infrastructure, particularly agriculture-based infrastructural activities, so that what has not been completely achieved by India over the several decades that rural infrastructure should be given the necessary boost. So in each one of these categories, we ensured that we were giving them enough infusion of cash through banks, through lending. One particular example is of the 3 lakh crores which I had announced for the medium and small scale enterprises. We even changed the definition to be suitable for the MSMEs which have been waiting for a change in their definition for quite some time because they were wary of losing the benefits once they keep growing, because MSMEs had distinct benefits given to them by policy, and once they kept growing and once they crossed the threshold of being an MSME, they would lose out on the benefits. So we made sure that the definition was changed so that they wouldn't have to worry about losing benefits. They would still get it having been an MSME for some time. Not only that, the 3 lakh crore is one example that I use to tell you that not just an announcement was made, but literally monitoring on a daily basis is happening. In that, first, we took an approach that banks should leave it to the customer, the MSME client, to say whether he wants it or whether he doesn't want this loan. So it wasn't the bank which was going to decide, it was the client who was going to decide. So no one was going to be found ineligible. In other words, the government was giving 100% guarantee that additional working capital would be given, additional term loan would be given, no one would be restructured much against their will. That is, if they restructured, they wouldn't be eventually sometime when they will be called an NPA because they were once restructured. So we ensured that all aspects of the rules which govern the banking, without hurting banks, let's say books, we ensured that money would reach. As I'm talking to you, I know nearly 1,80,000 crores have been sanctioned to the MSMEs, and of which nearly 85,000 crores have already been disbursed, meaning the money has gone into the accounts of these people, and this number is increasing by the day. Along with this, India has had a very peculiar setup in terms of the bank network. The scheduled commercial banks were most often found in metropolitan cities and also cities in the tier 3 tier and 2 tier. But further down the line, it was the non-banking financial companies which were there and which in the last probably 10 years have gradually lost out on a lot of clients who went bust. The NPA crisis had hit them. Now we came up with a partial guarantee system through which these NBFCs were also given money to carry on with their business, otherwise liquidity wouldn't reach the ground, by taking some of their not so investable grade assets too. Government took a big risk in taking assets which were not worthy, in taking their debt also, and then extending liquidity to them. As a result, today, most NBFCs have revived their business. They actually are very nicely spread in rural areas, far from flung rural areas, and businesses there. I am monitoring also the kind of lending which is happening. So the credit is not going to one particular class alone. Retail is happening, agriculture is happening, and so on.
So let's move on to the third theme, talking about the rural areas. So just today, I think it was covered by the Financial Times that over 120 million people in India lost their jobs. One estimate seems that about 40 million blue-collar workers left cities to return to their villages. So the question that I have is, are you seeing businesses that may have difficulty finding workers when because they have returned back home to their rural areas? And is the government considering any measures to help address these challenges, especially given the emphasis of your financial inclusion, etc.? So could you comment for a minute or so on that, and then I have to close one other question.
Very quickly on that. For those who migrated back to their villages during the lockdown, we looked at the numbers of people who've returned to their respective villages, and in about 116 districts, there were more than 25,000 of them in each one of them. 25,000 and more were in about 116 districts. In those districts, we have pulled all the government welfare schemes and said, between now and let us say October, they will all be engaged in governmental projects, which are rural projects, and paid so that they are not going to be without money in their hands. So many of the rural developmental activities have been taken up at a very, and I front loaded the money for it, 50,000 crores, and they've all got whatever assignment that area is undertaking through the governmental mechanism. So if they are there, they have some work, they get some money. In the meanwhile, I've also been talking with many industrial hubs to talk to industries to see what their actual problem is. Have their workers come back, or are they likely to come back now? And if they're not coming back, what provision are they making? And in that, what is it that the government has to do? I know from far-flung areas in the south, northeast, north, and so on, that many of them have now contacted those workers who've gone back to their respective villages to say, would you want to come now? And there are instances, of course, may not be commonplace, maybe one odd instances where 50, 60 of them have been brought together, aggregated, and taken back to their respective industries where they're working. Haryana government, for example, put it on the website and said, those who are coming back, please come back. Industries have said, we'll give you an additional 50% of salary so that you can. So that is happening and we are monitoring it.
Thank you. And I'm going to go, I know I'm getting the evil eye from the organizers, but I'm going to go 1 minute over. I'll play rank as the chairman of the USIBC. So the last point is ease of doing business. And your portfolio spans both the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Corporate Affairs. And the Modi government has done an incredible job. You know, the World Bank rankings moved up from 142 to 63, and with an aspiration to be in the top 50. So the question I have is, during this pandemic, we have enabled, digital measures to resolve these issues. For example, boards to fulfill their meeting mandates through video conferencing, digital signatures to use DocuSign and others. Will this continue post-pandemic to improve the efficiency, especially if you're going to have foreign directors, on boards, etc.?
I've seen a very positive response on this measure, which we took, as you said rightly, as a result of the pandemic, because we didn't want companies to suffer. But now it seems perfectly possible to have it run without any glitches. And companies are expressing confidence that this is possible to continue. So we'll take their views on board and we're open to it.
Thank you so much, Minister Sitharaman, for your candid comments and your vision. I'm sure our colleagues on the audience have all appreciated your comments. We are now going